Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events. We discuss the underlying connections and root causes that help us discover what is really true. We're developing an antiviral mindset in an age of spiritual illness.
Spiritual illness.
I was trying to play with mental illness, spiritual illness. Kind of relates back to some debates I've had on Facebook in the past, but
it's true. Insanity is a word I keep. There's an insanity abroad.
Yeah, but I think insanity and mental illness generally, you know, the recent debunking of the chemical imbalance theory or explanation for what's really wrong with people when they get stuck mentally. It's there's no evidence for it.
Yeah.
Somebody made up an explanation.
Yeah.
They don't really know.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it is spiritual in nature.
Or that it's all integrated. We can't really disintegrate or separate the mind and body, the immaterial and the material in our human beings.
Right.
We just can't do it as much as we would like to, we would like to. It'd be easier, but we can't.
Well, and I feel like the more we do separate, the worse the mental illness is.
It is. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Hey, there's a song that is going viral. I heard you kind of wanted to talk about
You're starting with this?
Yeah.
Richmond, north of Richmond?
The Richmond, yeah.
What do you think of that song? You heard it.
I've enjoyed it.
Listened to it a bunch.
Yeah.
I've listened to it several times. What do you think?
The best
what's
take I saw on it was not a commentary, but it was I didn't realize how many reaction channels there are out there, like YouTube channels. That's just a video and then faces reacting.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Apparently, there's a bunch.
I didn't know that either.
So what I watched was the song playing. And then all of these different people reacting. And it was black folks and white folks and older and younger and Asian and Latino, right? And they're all just connecting to this song.
Yeah.
So I watched that, and then I clicked over, this is on Twitter, I clicked over to Christianity Today's article talking about how this song isn't really loving your neighbor because it criticizes people who cheat on welfare. And it was like, oh my gosh, like how can the Christians miss it so bad?
That's sounding
And it's not
like
really the
National
Christians.
Review.
It's not really the Christians. It's
Yeah.
folks who consider themselves the intellectual leaders of Christianity.
Okay.
And they're not.
Where do they live?
Their thrones are done.
Where do
north
they
of
live?
Richmond.
That's
right.
right.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
exactly right. There's more kinds of richness than money as well.
Yes. Yeah, that sort of elite attitude.
Yes, it is
and
exactly what
power.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I saw a similar critique from the National Review folks.
Yeah.
You know, poo-pooing this.
Right.
And this mass enjoyment of it, right?
It
Which is interesting.
the phrase that came to my mind was straining the gnat while swallowing a camel.
Yeah.
It's like
Yes,
you guys
that's
can't
right.
see the forest for
That's
the
right.
trees.
That's exactly right.
And the thing I saw some Christian leaders criticizing was the foul language, right? Christians can't enjoy this song because there's swear words.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
horrifying because it's complete lack of compassion
Yeah.
for the people who are the song is for,
Yeah.
who are really struggling and discouraged. And in the face of that struggle and discouragement, you think it's pastoral to criticize the language, right?
Yeah. Okay, so let's ask this. Who is it for? When you say who it's for?
Well, it's for guys who, I mean, and not just men, but I think a lot, who are disaffected and discouraged economically. They're working long hours for no pay, right?
Yeah.
Everything's gone up. Nobody's listening to us. It's the people who, I mean, more and more, it's the vast majority of Americans who nobody's fighting for. I mean, it's the people, too, that Trump makes an appeal toward.
Yeah, that's right.
More than any other politician.
Yeah.
Including DeSantis or anyone else.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Which is funny because he's a rich man north of Richmond also, but he is not in that class, right?
Yeah,
Trump.
right. I think of
Which
Trump
is
as the
intriguing.
richest white trash guy that has ever lived, right?
That said without insult.
No, yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly right. He is a blue-collar attitude, which is interesting about him. I don't want to leave the Richmond topic, but it's interesting that his whole, making a hotel and it's all gilded in gold, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everything is gold. The toilet's gold. And this over the top, that actually plays into the same thing because it's a little tacky. It's like,
very, yeah.
Right? And so it is as if, well, anyway. So Richmond, north of Richmond, Any other thought on it? Any other?
Well, I'm curious now what your take.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was similar.
On second thought is what we're aiming at, right? So I had first thoughts, but I didn't really get to second thoughts for a while. Other than, it's catchy, but it's actually not that catchy. Lyrically, it's not great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of averageness in it, but it has struck a nerve.
Yeah.
What is the nerve that it has struck? And I did read a guy's assessment. I thought he was kind of onto something. And he goes, it's not just like this blue collar woe is me thing. It's more than that. It's the element of corruption.
Sure.
The Richmond north of Richmond aren't prosperous people, and I'm unprosperous.
Right.
It's cheating, lying, scheming, conniving people.
Yeah.
And I'm an honest person. In fact, he as an individual said, he's been interviewed obviously a bunch since it. He goes, I wrote the song hoping to hit 300 views on YouTube.
Right.
I had no expectation of this.
It was his first recording with a real microphone. Did you see that?
No, I did not see
There
that.
There was a video from last week.
Yeah.
Where he's on his iPhone saying like West Virginia radio or something.
Yeah.
Radio West Virginia is going to actually record me.
Yeah.
This will be my first thing where it's not just me on my iPhone. And he's talking in his car, right?
Yeah,
like you
on
see.
his iPhone, yeah.
And he says,
No, I didn't see that.
and he says something like, God willing, a few people are going to hear it.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
exactly. Then I read today that he's been offered some record contracts and deals.
Oh, I'm sure.
And he turned them down $8 million.
Good.
And the people, he goes, everyone is surprised, all these business people, but I'm not trying to get wealthy. That's not my goal.
Right.
I'm not even trying to be a musician.
Because he's an actual farmer.
Yeah, he's a farmer. And so that's why I think the guy had a good point on the analysis that this is not about just blue collar and not enough money or something, or a depressed economy. It is about a way of living that is being snuffed out by evil people.
Right.
It is, and this is not this man's words, but I thought of these words when I was reading this guy's assessment. And the guy who wrote this article grew up in the same area. He goes, I know what that man, I've lived in those towns. Yeah. The way of life in that town is being destroyed by the actions of the people above it.
And that is true conservatism. True conservatism in its best form is we have something good here. We have a way of life that's wholesome.
That's wholesome,
and it deserves to be fought for.
That's the bigger part he thinks why it's caught on is this wholesome versus this oppressive stuff.
Yeah.
And you know what it made me think of is the way the people, the settlers in our country, what ended up being revolutionaries, the way they talked about King George. Mm. They had no recourse against his evil and pernicious activities.
Right.
And finally, I mean, the T. The T is another one of his things, oppressive, out for himself, and they just had geography in their favor.
And what that makes me think about is because there's a lot of talk about war, right? Civil war also, in America. But this doesn't feel like the Civil War.
No.
It feels like the Revolution.
Oh, well, I don't think it's that even.
Do you know what I mean, though?
I do know what you mean on that.
Those two.
Yes, I agree with you on that. But the Revolution had geography. I don't believe it would have taken place had it been on the northern shores of England. A group of people.
Well, you also have isolation that you can say things, you can even organize, and King George is a long way off.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah. And that's not happening today.
Yeah.
So it's, anyway. Yeah, those are my thoughts on Richmond, north of Richmond. I think there are implications to that too. But I have to think about it a little more.
Did you see his imprecatory psalm reading?
No, I didn't watch it, but I read it.
It was quite moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if those maybe who don't know, an imprecatory psalm there are many psalms written by King David and others crying out for justice.
Yeah.
Even to the point of it can be troubling to read them, like asking God to destroy the enemies of the author. Even to destroy and harm their children, their widows, right, would be poor and destitute. And it's this cast your cares upon God because he cares for you, even if they're the raw, difficult.
Yeah.
So he was doing, what is his name? Oliver Andrew, the musician. He was, he was performing at a farmer's market. And he says, I was here a few weeks ago playing to 20 people and now it's packed, right? Yeah. But it's not even an auditorium.
Yeah.
It's just like a little covered area in the midst of a farmer's market, but there's maybe 1,000 people in view of the camera, singing along, because they've already got the words by heart. And before he sings the song that everybody's there to hear, he pulls out a Bible and he reads this Psalm 37, like, God, defend my cause, basically,
Yeah.
against the oppressor and
Yeah.
the evil who
Yeah.
laugh.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a phrase in there, God laughs at the schemes of the wicked
Yeah.
to defend the righteous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when he's reading it, his voice cracks in the genuine display of emotion of like,
Yeah.
this whole thing is a prayer.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was really moving to me.
So I guess maybe there are some other things to think about what this means too, that it's such a phenomenon for the moment, for a few days.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
One of them is it may not be as bad as we think when we think of the insanity. When we think
Okay.
of spiritual illness, right?
Right.
And if we wanted to make a small list of the things that have just been, we'll just call them the last 5 years, it's a horrifying list. I just watched just a little bit about, you probably saw it before, but I didn't want to re-watch it, but the thing about the girl testifying before Congress,
Yeah.
detransitioning, right? It's just horrifying.
Yeah.
And it is blatant abusive behavior by those in power, right? Because they can. And all these different things, if we made a list, and there are lots of lists, it's horrifying. But you know what? Things like this still happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not Nero. There are not lions' dens yet, right?
Right.
There are J6 prisoners. A lot of them are Christian men.
Oh man, I saw
But
those photos this week. Did you see that?
I did too. I did
5
too.
months in solitary, no windows.
Yeah, yeah.
No, lights
It's-
always on, no
it's-
blankets.
It's horrible. But it's how about this? It's dark, but it's not the middle of night, right?
Right. Yeah.
And in that sense also, we don't know. I told you before when we got on camera, I had been reading a biography of Tolkien. One of the points the guy makes is that they never know in the book. They always think this mission is going to fail,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. But all
Lord of the Rings.
indications, yeah, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
All indications over and over and over, it's going to fail,
Right.
and then it doesn't. And there are other forces at work that they don't know about, that they can't account for.
Mm-hmm.
But theirs is to be faithful to the charge given to them, right?
Right.
And you don't know. And they think most of the time this is doomed to failure. At one point, Gandalf says Sauron is going to rise and take over the West, basically. And,
Right.
and shadow will fill the whole land, right? But that's not what happens.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there's a strain of martyrdom in all of Christianity, obviously, right? But there's also kind of the concept of noble death that's far beyond Christianity, right? And they're not portraying like a warrior's death necessarily, though. There are a lot of warrior characters in the book. The real centerpiece of Sam and Frodo is not to fight, but to sneak,
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
I was having this conversation because one of my students is doing an essay on The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking about The Hobbit is very centered around greed. Mm-hmm. And it has a very ethical gray to itself, that he's the burglar, right? That he's
Yeah.
the bandit.
yeah.
That he doesn't just steal from the dragon, he steals from his friends in the end in order to stop the war, right? He steals the Arkenstone and he gives it to what seems to be the enemy, right? In the midst of what's coming. But this idea of if you always play by the rules in terrible times, you can't win, right? You have to have a higher guiding principle. And that higher guiding principle might lead you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, maybe things that you'd say are wrong.
Yeah.
But there's a courage to it, though, because he would even sacrifice his friendships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're a couple minutes in. We're going to change topics here, but we've had more listeners recently.
Yeah. We're getting into the triple digits on occasion. Big changes. Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, right? If we're going to have an impact, we're not just talking to ourselves. We don't need microphones for that. I just want to be a blessing to people. And I feel that I learn a lot by these conversations, right? And so
It
I'm
generates
blessed by it.
thoughts and generates new ideas, and in a sense, we're modeling. We're
Yeah.
modeling how to think about things and how to disagree and how to change your mind and etc.
One of our listeners told me recently she likes it when we disagree. When we were going back and forth on what was really about Christian nationalism, right?
Okay.
And the different spheres of authority and how
Yeah.
we kind of, it's been a running theme for the last five
yeah.
or so episodes.
Yeah.
And then she says, and I actually kind of agree with Mike.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to hear that. So
Yeah. Well, and we have we're trying to figure out our best way even to organize our stuff. So we keep picking up some threads that are right now I'm calling them ongoing discussions.
Yeah.
And whatnot. But hey, let me ask you about this.
Yeah.
Christian culture,
Okay.
good or bad, or is that lower on your list? Or do you have some?
Well, no, we can
Something
talk about
higher
that. That's definitely a concept.
I have your prior list of things, so maybe
So
you moved it down.
I'm going to connect with this with a couple things, right?
Yeah.
With Paul Washer. I mentioned him last time.
Paul Washer.
Paul Washer is,
Remind me.
is one of the fieriest preachers I've ever heard.
Oh, yes, that's right.
and I was
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
recommending him to you.
Yeah.
But in moderation.
Yeah.
Because you were talking about how certain, who was it?
Piper.
John Piper. You can only take so many in a row, and then it sort of wears you down.
It's too intense at times.
Paul Washer is like times 5
Yeah,
at least. So, but his stated mission as a preacher is to attack the concept of the sinner's prayer, giving you eternal security. And I agree with him wholeheartedly in the sense that you need to send people to God,
Yeah.
not to the pastor,
Yeah.
to be reassured of
Or
some
a
relationship.
prayer or a set of words.
Or I followed the rules, whatever these rules are. I did the
Come
steps.
just as I am. And you walk down the altar and you kneel.
And I remember actually growing up, my mom describing altar calls when her dad became a Christian, right, when she was little, so some 60 years ago. And that at that time, she described the altar was not a place where you went down to be met with the prayer team.
Yes.
You just went down there to get right with God.
Yeah, that's right.
And you could stay there as long as you wanted. And I was talking to a friend about where altar calls sort of came from in the Great Awakenings early in
Second Great
Americas,
Awakening.
right?
Methodism, yeah.
And that it was a like the pastor would leave. Like people are at the altar crying out to God. The pastor's not there to negotiate that with you.
Yeah.
You stay and I'll, keep it up. You're doing good. I got to go home.
Yeah.
But now it feels like the call to ministry is this like, so I've got to come and bear you along this journey. If someone falls away, people who are in church leadership feel responsible in a way that's like they're babies and I drop the baby, And there definitely are spiritual infants, but they don't stay that way. And it's unhealthy for you to try to keep them there. So that part of that, that's Paul Washer. But I was thinking about his railing is partly attacking Christian culture, that this kind of like popular Christianity that says I participated and therefore I know God.
Yeah.
And is worthy of attack.
Yeah.
I've seen on the other side, and this is more the Christian conservative side of things, who politically active Christians, I would say, where they see that as like that hierarchy rearing its head, that these holier than thou elite Christians, highly educated and writing more books than they should, and that their critiques of Christian culture is really a critique of the normal life, the middle class experience of Christianity. And so they get defensive of it and say, oh, you think your church is so cool, and so you're going to attack, and you see that with Matt Chandler and sometimes his name escapes me, but some of these bigger name Christians coming down on Christian culture, but almost because it's beneath me. And so I'm sort of struck because I agree with both, right? That Christian growing up in church, I think is what you would say is what Christian culture is a youth group version of Christianity. For example, I've talked to several adults who've walked away from Christianity, who I knew as a young man. We were coming up together in church. They seemed fervent and heartfelt, and now they're just not Christians at all, or in a really weird nominal sense. And when they describe what they reject about Christianity, it's as if I'm talking to their 12-year-old or their 15-year-old self. Like their maturity froze. So they grew up, but they never developed a mature view or understanding that goes deeper into the conflicts between, God being love and authority, for example. And so it was just like, oh, his authority's bad. The Bible's a contradiction. I'm walking away. And it's like, that's what kids say. That's what kids hear in youth group sermons, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't get to the meat.
Yeah.
And so they walked away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that a result of a Christian culture? Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Christian culture has always been a challenging thought, and I am conflicting ideas about it as well, in where I think different things that are in competition with one another. Where I've ended up is the idea that Christian culture is good when you're aiming for starting it, and it's bad once you get there. So it is, and it's almost like this. I use the analogy. Okay, let's say you are a party boy or party girl and you're into all kinds of illicit behavior and you become a Christian. Your life transforms.
Yeah.
You throw away your rock music. You throw away your whatever. You get rid of all these things that were the symbol and the activity of your rebellion.
Yeah.
You throw them away and you pursue God. And in that sense, you step and pursue a Christian culture. You want to Christianize everything in your life. That's
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
Here's what happens. Inevitably, almost always, these people down the road, they now no longer have non-Christian friends. They no longer engage with the world they live in, and they have separated themselves to such a degree that now they're living in an insulated bubble, and they begin to feel that they are holy. They begin to have a righteousness that they must guard now.
Yeah.
And they have a reputation that they've built that is something not to lose. And it's Christianized. And so in their minds, it's valuable. And so now this Christian culture has become something that weighs them down, drags them down, and also actually begins to distort their behavior. They can always justify it, but now it is self-righteous. It does smell as holier than thou. They forgot what they were 20 years ago because they can't abide the people who they were.
Right.
So
the other side of that, though,
bad.
the other side of that is you think back, this is how I worshiped God when I was 22, right? And it sort of comes with an embarrassment of like, ugh, I can't believe I was that. I threw away all those fantastic records.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I actually did, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that embarrassment leads to a critique of like, of not only yourself, but anyone who expresses that simplistic fervency.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
But so to save yourself of that embarrassment, you sort of are setting people up to maybe not obey the Holy Spirit, who is telling them to get rid of some things.
That's right.
Right? So it's sort of pushing compromise in the other direction.
Yeah.
And not only that, built into it is old Christian culture is really the culture of your parents. So there's a dishonoring of your father in that balance as well of like, I'm rejecting the popular expression my dad really liked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm cooler than that, right? So it's this weird teenage thing that people
That's
are falling
true.
back into. So there's both.
Well, and
right?
what I would add, my take on what you said, the weird teenage thing, is that Christian growth, this person who becomes a Christian and they change and their life gets changed, nobody realizes how immature they are and how self-centered even their Christian growth is, how pride-filled it is.
Yeah.
And you don't realize it for 30 years until afterwards. And you look back and say, I was such an idiot. I didn't even know.
Yeah.
I was as sincere as I could be. And I was a flat-out idiot. I was filled with pride.
Okay, so here's a
You
crazy
just didn't
thought.
know.
Here's a crazy thought. Because I use this a lot with teenagers. I say, think of yourself 5 years ago. Does it make you feel embarrassed? And they always say yes, right? I say, okay, now realize that in 5 years, you will be embarrassed by who you are now.
That's
right?
true.
But here's the other side of that. As a 45-year-old,
I'm
I
glad
think
you're
of myself
going
5 years ago, and I think, I'm not really that embarrassed.
Well,
Maybe
changes.
10, maybe I have to go
yeah.
15.
Yeah.
But like I've gone back and looked at some of the videos I made 4 years ago, and I think it was pretty good.
Yeah.
So does that mean I'm slowing in my growth? Does that mean
No, I
I've
don't
got
think-
the foundation?
yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
Or am I becoming that person you're describing who's now defending something
that could be a little
that's
bit.
self-righteous?
That could be a little
I
bit.
know. And I have to...
What I thought you were going to say is when you're the 45-year-old, you have to stop yourself from correcting the 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Who knows that they were embarrassed about being 15 and doesn't realize they'll be embarrassed at 25 about their 20-year-oldness.
Right.
You can't at 45 try to pull them up into their 25 or 30-year-old self and not live as the 20-year-old. You can't do that.
That's right.
It's actually abusive. That's a too strong a word, but it's bad. And I actually have a great admiration. I've thought about this lots of times. College presidents. A college president, 50, 60-year-old man, interacts with kids. What kind of internal patience and not mercy, I mean that's true, but just a love for people to be able to interact and never make the 20-year-old feel like an idiot.
And every year the freshmen arrive.
And every year it's the same thing.
So having been a
And
school
you just
principal
smile
though,
and talk with them.
I would guess college presidents 90+% of their job is dealing with faculty, not students. So what for me as a school principal, it was parents and teachers, right, all day long.
Yeah.
And it was more so kids because it was a small school. So I didn't have a dean, right, or someone to send kids to who were misbehaving. But the other thing was going to be with kids for me was like the stress reliever. If it was a hard day, man, I want to go read a book to some kindergartners. Yeah. That's going to make that day amazing.
Here. Okay, let me ask you another question. We're going to try to transition. Go ahead. Did you have more on that, Christian culture?
I'm good. Go ahead.
DeSantis, he's dropping in the polling.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
He's got a new
I fired his
campaign manager.
Vivek.
Rhymes with cake.
Surpassed him.
Ramaswamy, I got the last name right.
All right.
Okay.
Has passed him up.
Yep.
In some polls, Scott has passed him. But the point is he's dropping. Why? Why do you think that is?
Well, he's just not campaigning well. So part of I've been listening. Vivek's hit a lot of notes in the last couple of days.
I know.
He came out on Tucker, but he's also the topic of conversation. So I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and all they're talking about is Vivek.
I know.
But they were also like, why is DeSantis struggling? They're having the same conversation.
What do you think?
So what they were saying, because I have been wondering myself, but I'm not exposed to, like, if they're on some news story, I'm not watching it, right? Yeah. So a lot of it is secondhand, what I know about what's going on in the campaign, because it's so focused on Iowa. But I think that is part of DeSantis' mistake, because he's got Iowa clearly. And you can now see Trump criticizing the Iowa governor, pushing Iowans away and saying, that you guys don't, you've betrayed me, I'm out, because he knows he's lost it. So he's sort of given Iowa to DeSantis, but now running a bigger game. And so if DeSantis has been too focused on Iowa, then maybe he's losing the plot in the bigger picture. I think that could be part of it. But if you take Vivek as an example, because Trump has his shtick and he's got his core group of people. What Vivek is doing is he's so dynamic.
Yes.
He can just, his conversations are
And he hits
phenomenal.
the nail on the head over and
it feels like the conversations we're having.
Yeah.
But he's got thoughts about it. He's got really good words.
Data, and he's super quick.
And
agile.
what I think DeSantis brings, because he doesn't have that.
No, he doesn't.
What he brings is a hammer. And he says every nail's getting hammered down. And that's what I want.
It doesn't mean he doesn't have that internally, because he acts out of that same understanding of what the left and wokeism is.
But what he's lacking,
what
he's lacking and what Vivek has been really strong at is a positive vision for a future.
I agree.
And it's also what MAGA means.
Yeah.
Like when Trump landed on MAGA, it lit up, because I do want America to be great again. It sucks right now.
Yeah.
Right? And you can argue who was it great for and all that. But we just want better.
Yeah.
And we don't want to feel ashamed all the time for our country, which is what Obama brought.
Yeah.
What he's bringing now under Biden.
And intentionally. Yeah. Speaking of which, side trail then back to DeSantis. I have a theory. I wish conservative authors would quit saying the Biden administration. I wish they would start saying the Biden. Just put the
but it feels gimmicky, doesn't it?
Well, then do something else. But quit acting like this is what he's doing.
Like this guy is in charge of anything. He's not even in charge of what he's allowed to say.
He's not. And so quit giving it that to him. And I think they must be doing it on purpose, because they can't prove anything else. But it just, what it does is deflates their arguments, because you read it and you think, Obama can't be doing this, and it sucks the air out of the argument they're trying to make.
Yeah.
Anyway, DeSantis, here's my theory.
Tell me.
My theory is this. Florida governor who has a Republican House.
Okay.
He doesn't have to battle for that. He had to battle to win. He's had a Republican House, and he's had his way, in a sense, and he has been and the country watched him, especially with Disney stuff and a whole number of things like that. and thinking, sweet, somebody finally standing up to these fools.
Yeah.
These people these destroyers. Okay?
That's a good word. Yeah.
And here's somebody standing up to him, and they're turning the weight of, and it's not unfair. This is why he's elected.
Yeah.
To do these things. And he's got this Republican, his own state Congress, and they're doing stuff. And it's like, this is a hero, man. I want somebody to do that for our country.
Yeah.
He should do that for our country. The problem is, there's two problems. One, getting there, he doesn't have support. There's not a Republican cheering section to have his ideas for somebody to say, yeah, let's do it. The media is going to actually attack him.
Yeah.
And he's not used to that. And number two, I actually think if he were president today in the current setting, it would not be successful because he has been successful with a backing Congress rather than an adversarial Congress in his state.
But when he got elected, he didn't have a strong Republican base.
He had the majority.
He was exerting, part of what his strength was under COVID was exerting his executive privilege in a way
Yeah, I agree
when
with
it
that.
really mattered, because COVID was all about executive power.
Yes,
the
that's
whole
right.
thing.
But it wasn't just the COVID that made conservatives. It was COVID that, the
For
clever
DeSantis.
line for DeSantis that Florida is free.
Right. Yeah.
That was great. But the other big one was the crazies with Disney and firing. He fired district attorneys.
Yeah. Right.
He fired them, right? That's actually more the executive side too, right? But the Disney stuff is the legislature. So he brought about victories because he has allies.
Yeah.
And to become president, he'll have no allies.
Okay.
And if he were president today, no, in that the main arena is the press, and he's not going to.
But part of the reason he's faltering is that every other candidate is against him and him alone. Because Trump is now the big victim because he's been charged with all these crimes unjustly, And so every other candidate is saying this is not right, defending Trump.
Yes.
And then
But why doesn't DeSantis
everybody
do that?
else, he does, but not a lot.
He should.
Right?
He should.
But what DeSantis is basically treated like the front runner, even though he's second place and now maybe third. Because
In an emotional sense, maybe.
Vivek doesn't attack Trump, but he does DeSantis,
Yeah.
Nikki Haley, and all the way down the line.
Yeah.
And so
Except for Pence.
the amount of attacks and free publicity against him has been off the charts. Mm-hmm. But that's
Against Trump.
No, against DeSantis.
Oh, against DeSantis.
In favor of Trump.
Yeah.
Because to me, it feels
Yeah.
like everybody besides DeSantis is running for a cabinet position or the vice
Yeah, I think
presidency.
that too.
And so they're all looking at Trump and saying, look, I went against the only guy that can actually
Yeah.
stand up
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's my thought is
But maybe that'll be an advantage.
Not an adversarial leader.
If he becomes an underdog, that might be to his advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's how Trump can only be the underdog.
Yeah.
He can't be the leader.
The problem is, I think Vivek, as well as Trump, can articulate combatively with the media and the ideas.
Yeah.
I don't think DeSantis has that strength.
Oh, I totally do.
Oh,
I've seen him do it in ways that are pretty impressive.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about. For example, I saw him with the kids, the college kids or high school kids.
Okay.
Take your masks off and all the thing. That was good, but that's not the same thing. He's in a position of
I'm
authority.
talking about with the press, where he just gives
Okay.
it right to him and doesn't let him
Yeah.
get an inch
Yeah.
with
In
their
Florida,
false narrative. Yeah.
why hasn't that translated
on
to
the
national?
Well, I think if it does, it doesn't get promoted. And I think his campaign, their job is to promote his wins, and it doesn't seem like they're creating that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But if there's a big system, because what I've heard is DeSantis is the only one that the leftists are actually scared of. Mm-hmm. They're not scared of Trump. They know they can beat him. Even if they don't beat him in the election, they can beat him in office. They can keep. And they're not.
I don't agree with that. I think it's
all
not
the
that
other
they're
people
not-
are unproven.
Can't beat him. They had to resort to cheating. And
Well, they're
the
perfectly willing to continue that.
I know, and I'm sure cheating is addictive, right? You cheat,
Yeah.
you want to cheat next
It's like
time.
quitting.
And it's like taking a mulligan in golf. Man, once you let the first one in, You start hitting your shots over, right? You can't let it start.
How many mulligans are you allowed? We always allow one per round.
No, yeah, we don't do any.
That's just disc golf.
But the point is, I think that. Well, anyway, my point, I think, is I've begun to wonder if DeSantis is more fitted for a governorship in which he has an allies and he can do his thing from that than on a national stage.
But if you look at Florida before DeSantis, I mean, his first election, he squeaked in.
I know.
Florida's been a swing state forever.
Yeah.
And now it's 20% red.
Yeah.
So I think his power is persuasive in the sense that when he does good, he does it for the people, and he defends it in a way. I still have hope for him.
Yeah.
It'd be a bummer if it faded out, but I think he's still got a fight in him. So we'll see. I got a question for you.
Go.
You wanted to talk about chaos creatures?
Oh, chaos
Sea
creatures.
of chaos. What is this about?
Chaos creatures. Okay. Well, we'll jump into the weeds here. And this is a larger topic we've hit on here and there in terms of the council of the divine council, the fact that the world is populated with other beings.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And God has a second family, right? That's Heiser's phrase, which is a nice one. We're his second family. His first family was a family of spirits. We are accustomed to the word angels, but I like the word spirits better because angels are actually probably one small category in the larger category of spiritual beings.
Right.
So in spiritual beings, the thing I have, so I'm trying to get past the background really quickly of, there's these spiritual beings and there are archangels and there are principalities and powers and there's some names and we have a couple names like Michael and Gabriel, right? Mm-hmm. And we have Lucifer and Son of the Morning and of course now it's Satan and a dragon and a third that are swept away and all this. We have these. If we were painting a picture, there'd be quite a few little details to put in to get a whole picture of what the Bible seems to say is this invisible world.
Yeah.
Right? Now, anyway, one of the things I've been thinking about that is I've not read anywhere, and so these are from my own thoughts. And it comes from the idea in Colossians where it uses the elemental. They use this phrase, the elemental things of the world.
Okay, yeah.
The elemental, the stoichia is what it is in Greek. The elementals is interestingly in fantasy literature, elementals are not just like elementary things, ABC, but elemental things like gravity or the force of wood and fire and of rock.
Yeah.
They're living things that have sentience.
They're beings.
They're beings.
Right.
The elementals. But they are the beings that are so primal that they are not close to humanity in terms of having individuality and personhood.
Right.
They're further away, like getting closer even to the force, so to speak, right?
Okay.
Not the force, so don't anybody hear me and think I'm advocating for that theologically, but in that direction.
Well, the force, if you look at the force or gravity or some of these others, if you were going to give them personas, the trick is that you're into the beginnings of science, in that gravity behaves in a predictable way. So it makes sense to have a god of thunder because you don't know when lightning will strike. And so it makes sense to give it a will of its own.
Yes.
Because it seems unpredictable. Whereas everything you drop falls to the ground.
Yeah.
So that doesn't feel as personal.
Well, except medieval theologians not only agreed with your first statement, but they differed from your second one. They say the consistent things also have spiritual beings, and they were like prime movers is what Aristotle called them. So every planet had an angelic being that was the core of that planet fused with the material components, so to speak.
Right.
And a waterfall, there were spirits. The spirits populated all things physical and consistent, both inconsistent and consistent.
Okay.
Right. So there was capricious things like Thor, the god of thunder and whatnot, but there was static things too that were the forces of nature that were mysterious and awe-inspiring and beautiful and whatnot.
Yeah.
So anyway, where I get to all this, what it makes me begin to think about is in my mind I see a spectrum of spiritual beings. And that on one end are there are spiritual beings of which we know a name. Mm-hmm. And Michael, let's say. We know that there are more names in that we just don't know what they are.
Right.
There's speculation in history, but we know from Philippians where it says he's been given a name above every name. There are more names.
Yeah, sure.
But even that idea of name there seems to almost be the nature of a being. Name is not just like Luke or Mike. Name is almost like the thing that defies your entity. That there are names.
And that's where this
almost
interesting...
like king and hero, and the names become mythically large.
Yeah. If you look at the names that we give to God or Satan, both, they're purposeful names, right? The provider.
Yes, right? Exactly. Things like that. Jehovah Jireh or Lord of the Morning.
Yes. Or even the accuser.
Yes.
Or the
they
the
participate
devil.
in what would Freud call them? In a mythic, a large. I'm not thinking of the word.
But that's how everybody's name was in the Bible.
Cosmic.
Right?
I know.
Abraham.
Old names
we're
closer to that.
Father
idea.
of nations, father of many nations.
I know.
So to say like, oh, okay. Why wouldn't the spiritual beings? Well, not only that, but the giver of names is in a position of power.
That's true.
Right? And if you were to change someone's name, you would assume quite a bit of power over them. And God changes people's names at pivotal moments.
Yeah. So on the spectrum, you have these named entities, these named beings. Then you have, there's things that are named. We just don't know what they are.
Sure.
And there's things of principalities. There's things with descriptions. But as I'm moving left or right, it doesn't matter how in my mind is moving left on the scale. I'm thinking that there are elementals. There are beings that are not personhood oriented.
And you're not talking on the Marvel Cinematic Universe here.
Nope.
Okay.
But they are picking up this thread of an idea when they say that. They're just humanizing it because they have hands and feet and eyes and all whatnot.
Yeah.
And another one of the verses that does this, makes me think this, is in 1 Corinthians when it says, death, where's your sting? Death is talked to as if death is a person.
Right.
Interestingly enough, right? It's personified, but not clearly. It's only under the surface, so you get the feel of it rather than the overt expression. Yeah. So then I begin to wonder, if then, now this gets to chaos then. The ancient Near East view was that the world, when God created, he brought out of chaos this physical world in the midst of a spiritual world that we don't see and have a difficulty understanding because of our limitations.
Yeah.
But that in that world, he's bringing order, and creation is the act of bringing order. So that I'm wondering if in the fall, in the mystery of it for humanity, but then there's a fall for spiritual beings, and there's this tail that sweeps a third and whatnot. Is it possible that the fall, all earth is subject to a curse, right? All creation, doesn't say earth, creation is cosmos, is the world. Mm-hmm. Does that mean spiritual beings? So you have the wrestling of the prince of Persia, and that's Michael, isn't it, that one? You have this wrestling that's taking place. So the angelic beings that are not fallen, they're not just like the rulers. They're not the stronger. They don't have bigger muscles than the ones that have fallen. Mm-hmm. It's a battle. It's a contest, right?
Yeah.
And they labor under fallen conditions as well, even though they're not fallen. So what I'm wondering is this: are there forces in the world that are a part of the spiritual entities that are in chaos, though not fallen themselves? They commit no sins.
Yeah.
They're not fallen like the devil and his angels, so to speak, who have chosen a side out of their personhood of some kind.
Yeah. So when it says nature groans.
Yes, nature groans.
Creation groans.
Creation groans.
In expectation of the coming of the sons of God.
That's a good one. I actually hadn't thought about that.
So that's a personification.
It is.
Right?
It's as if there's another form of life inside creation that would groan when we look out at the mountains and the seas and the trees and the stars and the moon.
Well, so if Satan comes to Christ in the desert and says, all the nations, I've conquered all the nations and I can give them to you, right? And Jesus doesn't deny that statement.
No, he doesn't.
He just refuses it. But the idea that there's a conquest of the rulers of the nations,
yes,
right, which is part of the mythos of the Council of Gods, and that it actually is Mount Hermon was considered by the Near East religions to be the place where
Yes.
the council of gods took place, right?
For one set of peoples, yeah.
Yeah.
Other mountains for other set of peoples.
Well, so like in the story of Job, where God calls together the council
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
convenes this conversation with
Yes.
Satan,
The Satan.
the Satan. Yeah. It was thought, is my understanding, to have happened on Mount Hermon, where Jesus goes.
That I've not read about that one in particular, about
Well-
the Job conversation. But yes, I do
well,
think that's why
Job,
Jesus goes.
Job is the big
yeah.
reveal of that council, right?
Yeah.
It's not mentioned a ton in other places that I know of in the scripture, even
Yeah.
though it is in like Book of Enoch and other places.
Yeah.
So, but my thinking is, okay, there's all these beings. They seem to have been given rulership over nations, perhaps people groups, geographic places. So
Yeah.
it's not just saying nature groans in the sense that like the bees in their hives wish that Jesus would return, even though that is, I think, what it's saying.
I do too.
But also to say that there are spiritual beings, angelic, I think is an okay word, even though it has these other ancient meanings. Because angelic to me means spiritual, right? Even though that's not what it really means.
That's right. It does.
Yeah, in the vernacular.
Yeah.
These beings are waiting and longing. And it's not just like they stand around in heaven and sing songs. They've been tasked to go to and fro on the earth, right? They go up and down the ladder that Jacob saw.
And Psalm 82 is a big one for this, that they are tasked to develop and cultivate the earth in their own specific ways as an assist to mankind under Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve are given this calling in the earth, but apparently the first family is given this calling to assist the second family, to help them out,
Right,
help
yeah.
them in what they're doing. And Psalm 82 is this assertion that you're not doing this. You're not doing this justly.
Right.
I'm giving you warning. You're not helping out. You're going to die like men if you keep this up.
Right.
Right. So when I think of chaos now, I've adjusted some of my thinking in that there could be things that happen. Let's just say a hurricane, for example.
Okay.
Now we know that there is a hurricane. We get into elements of providence here, but there's a hurricane in Job, right? That is instigated by spiritual being for some form of malice. It's unclear what exactly the malice is, but it's some kind of testing, because the Satan in Job is probably not Satan as the New Testament thinks of him. It's a pre-version
Yeah.
on the way there. But he's a part of the divine council whose job is like a defense attorney or a prosecuting attorney to try to show weaknesses. Everyone being faithful here. Are there problems? I think I found a problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So this hurricane comes about in that way. Can hurricanes come about from forces of darkness for evil intent? I think yes.
Well, Jesus gives an example of that when he rebukes the storm.
Okay, that passage.
He wouldn't rebuke it if there wasn't ill intent. I don't see how
I agree
that's
with you
possible.
on that. In that passage in particular, there's a Mark version and I think it's a Luke version, but in that passage is riddled with spiritual persons in all the language. The language, so we just read it recently with my Greek group, and the language, the verbs, the nouns, they're all taken from earlier passages in which spirits are actually overtly on the surface of the stories. And so you can't, that is not meant to be a natural storm that Jesus rebukes.
Right.
There are spiritual dynamics in this storm that are opposing him. It is like Tolkien's Caratus, the mountain with the snow.
Right.
You know,
And
there's
the
a
nature's
foul voice
opposing.
on the wind.
So I think of this movie that came out this year, Nefarious.
I did not see it. Did you see it?
Oh yeah, and I recommend it.
Yeah,
And
I need to.
It's a portrayal of
haven't yet.
a criminal
Yeah.
on death row who is possessed, I think might be the right word, even though it's not, of a demon, and a psychologist who's communicating with that
Yeah.
spiritual being.
Yeah.
But in the making of this movie, I've listened to Steve Dace talk about it. He's the author of the book that inspired the film.
Okay.
He said of the production team, so the directors, the producers, of the like 24 or maybe less people on that team for the making of the movie, eight of them have been hospitalized in car accidents. Like 4 of them almost died of COVID. Like the list is unbelievable.
Yes.
That it is within the
Yes.
powers of the dark forces
Yes.
to create physical mayhem
Yes,
today
I
now.
agree.
Right. Forces of chaos.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
What I'm also suggesting is that there are forms of chaos that may come about because the spiritual dynamics of the world are broken.
Yeah.
They're under a curse. So there could be a hurricane that is just because there are spiritual forces that exist and they are now chaotic.
But not sinister.
But not personally or individually fallen and sinister and doing evil.
Right.
But it's just broken. Anyway, that's my thought about
so that makes me think of
chaos preachers.
some of the YouTube preachers who said they could rebuke a hurricane that was coming into Florida a few years back, and they were unsuccessful.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it also reminds me of Jesus' talk of birth pains.
Yeah.
And I don't know that when he, because he says there'll be earthquakes, there'll be
Yes.
turmoil,
Yeah.
that this is just part of the process.
Yeah.
And so does that mean he's removing, does it mean God's allowing these things even though some of them are evil? Or
Yeah.
does it mean that some of them are just the natural outcomes?
Or let's just take that verse there, which I'm glad you mentioned. I've not thought about that one in this light, but it's perfectly suited to it. Instead of viewing this as climactic or climate-oriented coincidences that God has said are going to happen at the same time I'm bringing, no. Step back behind it and recognize that the victory of Jesus, the resurrection, has altered the physical and the spiritual realm first, and it manifests itself out physically.
Yeah.
And when his return is nearing, it's shaking everything.
Well, then the conversation I had recently with a friend was about, the Bible's very clear. I think it's in 1 Peter. He talks about hastening the Lord's return. And if we can hasten the Lord's return by advancing the gospel, right, by living a holy life in such a way that God can find us useful, well, then we can certainly delay it.
That's true.
Right? And so what has delayed his coming, in some portion, we bear the guilt of that as followers.
When we say that, theologically, we have to say in tandem with another idea, we don't know
the day or the hour.
And he's the one going to bring it.
Correct.
That's true. And the other one can be true too.
Yeah. Okay, so you take in consideration that we can delay his coming, and you remember when Jesus is casting out a demon and the Spirit says, have you come to destroy us before the time, right? So the demons know there's a time. And they also, knowing the Bible well, know that that time can be delayed if only we can make these children of God less useful to him and less effective in the world. So there's a corrupting motive to say we can push this back. We can live as kings a little longer, even though we all know we're going down.
Yeah.
Right? And so that chaos serves a purpose. Like I think about how accessible now abortion pills are, and how many women will take upon themselves the shame and the guilt of having committed an abortion themselves. If you go to an abortion clinic, well, you kind of didn't do it. Like you went along with it, but they did it. And you were under drugs and under stress. Well, now you ordered them on Amazon. And and that baby comes in your home. You know what I mean? And so the shame that goes with that as far as I can have heard from many people, doesn't just go away, right? It follows you. Well, it also pushes you farther from God. In a way that you might have easily repented. Now you have this shame. That's like putting up a wall. That's feeding your pride to say, no, it's not, it's not wrong. And it creates this sort of gritting of teeth. And that is the enemy at work. To delay his return, to create that chaos.
The reason I think this is a significant is worthy of on second thought is because if we don't have some form of idea that's like this, we end up looking at all bad events and either going one of two directions, saying they're all from the devil,
right?
But that becomes a dead end road. You bang your head against a wall and get bloodied on that one. But so will the other one, is saying you end up with a theory of chance. And God is not in control of things. There is no divine orchestration, and it just happened. And I think that becomes a problem too. It's not necessarily in that issue, but that becomes, I think it's the Bible's overwhelming message is, no, God is in control of all things.
Right.
So anything that leads us to other positions is unhealthy. But I think the alternative of saying, well, every bad thing is from a fallen spirit doing evil, I think that becomes a problem. And so I think it's better, I find it easier to say, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes I don't know the reasons there could be there's destruction not always driven by the malice of an entity.
Right. Yeah. The part of what I've been struggling with lately, and I don't have a resolution on this, is that it feels like you're in a sword fight in the dark. And so did I just hit the coat rack, or did I actually strike the sword of my enemy? I'm not sure.
You're not, and you have to keep fighting.
But I don't think we're meant to be in the dark.
I do. I think that
like there's
not
a spiritual gift
of
discernment.
Mm-hmm. I agree that.
And so so when calamities come, right? Even the Apostle Paul speaks of, I prayed to God to take this thorn from my flesh, and he answered and said no, right? Well, he didn't just pray and then said, who knows, right? Mm-hmm. But instead he said, no, God showed me. Mm-hmm. And I find in myself, and I think it's common, this sense of like, who can tell? When in fact, God wants to tell us if we persist. And I need to get more persistent.
Yeah, I agree. There's discernment. Pro-life or abolitionist, that reminds me, I don't know if that's on your thing.
It is on my thing.
Okay, so we can go there, but I'll just throw in a comment real quick.
Okay.
I just saw a phrase the other day, first time I ever saw it. The pro-forced birthers. Had you seen that?
No. I mean, I've heard that.
I've never heard
forced birth.
Forced birth. Yeah. Instead of calling us pro-life, call it us pro-forced birth.
Yeah. So these abolitionists, I've seen some of their content. I talked with a guy who's very fervent in that direction.
Okay, tell me what do you mean?
So, the pro-life movement, and we saw this week. There was a woman who's the like public relations media person for Ohio's Right to Life.
Okay.
And she posted on Twitter, like, there's no hope except in Jesus Christ. Well, an Ohio congressman said this is the most bigoted tweet I've ever seen.
A Republican.
He was a Republican. He's
that.
Jewish. He's saying, how dare you say that Jesus is the only way, basically.
Yeah.
And all these Christians were like, what? Like, it's bigoted to just declare your faith in Jesus? Like, that's nuts, right? Even Ilhan Omar came to the defense of the Christian woman, which is crazy that I've never retweeted Ilhan Omar in my life. And I did this week. All right, so what's coming out is, especially with the end of Roe v. Wade, the sort of national anti-abortion movement or pro-life movement is faltering because we don't have a national, it's now state to state, right? Yep. So how do we raise all this money for this big national, it's like now all these local clinics, or like I used to be affiliated with Obria, right? Our local sort of like rescuing young women from crisis pregnancies in hopes to avoid abortion, but they're also providing these great care.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so their fundraising is going to go up in all the national, and so there's all this infighting and backbiting and betrayals going on in the pro-life movement because nothing raises money like a losing cause, right? When you start winning, suddenly how do you raise money on winning?
Yeah.
And that's what they're seeing.
Yeah.
Okay. So part of the way pro-life movements in the past have strategically fought abortion, let's say, is to, for example, pass a 12-week ban on abortion. You can't do any abortions after 12 weeks.
Yeah.
But sometimes they'll pass those laws in states where all abortions are illegal. Or there's no law out about abortion, so it's treated as murder when it's prosecuted. So now it's got a 12-week ban, which means that the pro-lifers just allowed abortion up to 12 weeks by passing that law. So the pro-life is sort of always negotiating. Pro-lifers famously came after Trump when he said, no, we would prosecute women if it's murder and a woman commits murder, why would we not?
Yeah.
And the pro-lifers said, no way, we don't do that, right? We're going after the doctors. Now there's not many doctors, right? It's strategic, but it feels like a little compromising. So the abolitionists are saying, we're not pro-life. We want to abolish all abortion. We're hardliners.
Okay, so abolitionist is about the topic of abortion.
It is.
Okay, I didn't.
And what they're using is they're using slavery as the metaphor.
Let me restate your thing just in one sentence. You're trying to say pro-life being strategic limitations,
and it's the big
versus abolition
industry.
saying no.
It's the pro-life industry.
Yeah,
is almost what I'm saying, right? Because it's the old line conservatives. It's like the Republicans that have been out forever. And so they have this infrastructure they've built around fighting this fight, but they're very strategic, and we don't do it that way, we do it this way.
Yeah.
And so now rolling in on this are these abolitionists who say, oh no, we're fighting it all.
Fighting it all. So
right?
what do you think? You have it on second thought?
What's your
thing?
So far, I'm kind of a fan.
Yeah.
in the sense that I feel like the Overton window, meaning the range of behaviors that are considered acceptable by polite society, you don't move that. It's been moving to the left
Yes.
steadily for the last, I don't know,
Yeah,
6
yeah.
decades, probably 8.
Yeah.
If you go, you don't move it back by staying inside of it, right?
Okay.
You can't behave in an acceptable way and think you're
Okay.
going to change what's acceptable.
Okay.
The best you can do is keep it, right?
Not incremental.
Like as it moves towards you, you can say, well, I'm not moving until it hits the edge. But what you see Republicans doing is they're kind of move with the edge.
This is the problem, is that the left can incrementally move left and they're fine. Degradation can go one step at a time.
Right.
The right has to say, no, it's murder. I can't do any steps.
Yeah.
I can't slide back. But strategically, we get clobbered for that because it's very difficult to take full steps.
So what I feel like the abolitionists are is, as the window of normal has moved to the left in the last several decades, and Christians have sort of tried to stay relevant by moving with it, right? Being on the right side of it, like the right edge.
Okay.
What these guys are saying, you know what?
Give
We
up
need to
on
go
it.
back to where we were. And they're going way back and saying, this is now the line. And with abortion, I'm with it. I feel it.
That's interesting. So one of the things that flitted through my head when you said that, I said, I wonder how much of this is personality driven. Do you
Yeah.
like it because there's an extreme not extreme as in bad, but a posture, get out of it to help
An
maybe
unswerving.
to drag it back, right? It's
Yeah.
a violent response in a sense. And that is promoted in Scripture to a degree when it says the kingdom of heaven suffers violence and the violent take it by force.
Right.
There is something in Scripture that advocates for that way of thinking about things. Right?
Sure. Well, so here's my thought too, is if you look at, like, growing up Christian, the Christians who were the most sold out for God, the most extreme, I think is the right word, would be missionaries in a country that persecutes Christians. Okay? Or at least missionaries in a third world country where it's going to be uncomfortable. There's a lot of the Muslim world where their version of the most extreme is going to be someone that's going to martyr themselves for the sake of holy war. Okay? And every religious or ideology is going to have its version of the heroes, right? And so the left has their Antifa, people that are on the fringes. And if you're not on the fringes, in my conversations with people in Oregon who are liberal leftists, they look at Antifa with sympathy. They say, I wouldn't go that far, but I understand.
Yeah.
What I see Christians doing when they look to their right and they see the Proud Boys or they see some of these abolitionist guys who are on the verge of violence even, it's like with embarrassment and shunning.
Yes, that's true. You're
It's saying,
right.
no, you need to be
You're right.
more like Tim Keller.
You're right.
And what Tim Keller was doing is dancing in the middle, saying, look, we
Yeah.
can have a third way. The third way is the middle.
Yeah.
And so
Okay, you're
just shifting the window.
Yeah. So I'm probably going to be, for whoever listener you're talking about that said you like when we disagree, so I'm probably going to be different for you on this.
All right, go for it.
Because I think that, okay, let me ask you this question, because this might show a difference. Do you believe it's okay as a Christian to do the lesser of two evils?
Well, I think realistically you can't live without doing that. On some
I know,
level.
that's where I go, realistically.
Yeah.
But so I have a friend in California who...
Well, I think it's biblical on some level too. So Rahab lies to protect the spies.
I actually
she
don't think it's unbiblical.
She lies out of faith.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's a difficult question. So let's just say political candidates. When it's in the primaries, I think you vote for who you think is best, even if you don't think they'll win.
Yeah. Who's
But-
going to move the needle closer to where you need it
That's
to be?
right. And
Yeah.
you can be objective. You can be a Christian. I'm going to vote for, I don't think it's even wrong to say, in the primaries, I'm voting for the Christian guy or I'm voting for whatever.
Right.
Doesn't have a chance to win, but that's what the primary is about.
Yeah.
But then once the person is elected as the front runner and both parties have their front runners.
Once it's Trump versus Hillary.
Once it's
what
Trump
do you gotta
versus
do?
Hillary, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And I think I know people who said, I cannot, as a Christian, vote for Trump because of X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Which I don't mind that attitude in the primaries, but I think it's the wrong attitude when it gets to that point. I think it's not biblical, because I think then I'm in agreement with you do choose the lesser of two evils. You're not casting your faith aside to vote for Trump against Hillary. I have a friend who did not do that, and he votes for some other Christian guy who's a third party and got probably less than 0.1%, right?
Yeah.
And because he can't vote for Trump and he won't vote for Hillary.
Right.
So where do you fall in that?
Well, in
your comment a
2016, I
minute
didn't
ago-
vote for Trump.
Yeah,
I voted for Mitt Romney. I wrote him in.
yeah.
But that was pre-revolution.
You should have said Mitt Romney. You get crucified for that now. At the
I
time.
Speaking of looking back with embarrassment,
Yeah,
right?
there we
There
go.
it is,
That's
for
a good
sure. But here's what it was, is Mitt Romney was the respectable guy.
Yeah, I understand.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
And
I understand the 2016.
back then, what was left
Pierre,
and right.
we found out he's Pierre.
Oh my gosh. So back, I would say from Bush 1 on till Obama, it felt like left and right was this huge difference. But now we've zoomed out so much, it feels like they're just bouncing along the same bowling lane.
And in retrospect,
we're on this huge
they weren't
spectrum.
too far apart.
They weren't
themselves.
Obama perpetuated all the global forever wars that Bush started.
It's the elitist.
It is, yeah.
It is one
And
category. It's
so
a
what I
uniparty.
thought was like, Trump was too much for me. And
Yes,
in my mind,
I
even if,
understand.
well, one, I'm
Still
in
too
Oregon,
much.
so my vote doesn't matter that much anyway. But two, is Hillary's going to do what Obama was doing before. And it's not good, but it's not the end of the world. And so now that we've gone through 2020, it's like, oh no, like they would end the world to keep their positions of power.
I actually
And
personally,
so
an
everything's
aside
changed now.
on that. I actually think Hillary would not have done the same. I think she would have moved to the center, and here's why.
Because Clinton did.
Her husband did, and
Yeah.
and he would have advocated for that. But I think the main reason is this: she would not have wanted to been seen as the first weak woman president, and so she is going to lead with more moderate control because she doesn't want to get lambasted.
Right.
And so that was my theory. And I actually personally voted for Trump, but I didn't think that a Hillary win would be catastrophic.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I thought it would be bad, but I didn't think it'd be Obama, in my opinion, began a catastrophic reign, which I think he still
is
at the helm
continuing
of.
to
Yeah,
inflict. Yeah. What I saw in Trump and why I voted for him in 2020 was that he was willing to stand up and fight.
I know.
And it reminded me a lot of a quote that
and not do nuclear weapons and not do the things that
Jeez,
a lot of
yeah.
people were fearful he might.
So there's a quote from Lincoln talking about Ulysses S. Grant, who was a drinker, right?
yeah.
And he was kind of a slob, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And he was getting criticized by someone in D.C. saying, how can you put this guy as the leader of your army? And his answer was, he fights. And Lincoln's big struggle in the war is all these letters to
true.
generals saying, why won't you attack?
I know.
Well, that's like the Republican
Did
Party
you
to
ever
this
read
day.
Team of Rivals?
No.
I know you don't read a lot.
always ask me
That's
books.
in the top 5.
Is there a podcast I can listen to about it?
Maybe. It is so excellent. It's about Lincoln and the generals and his cabinet and how he interacted with them. It is incredible.
But, as the
Anyway.
first Republican president,
Yeah.
it's describing Republicans to this day.
Yeah, that's true.
They won't fight. Now we got a guy.
Yeah.
He's a cad, right?
know.
He's
Yeah, that's a
he's
good way to put it.
bombastic.
Bombastic.
He's
I like
disgusting at
that.
times.
Yeah.
He's embarrassing.
Yeah.
But he fights.
I know, it's true.
And so in 2016, I didn't need a fighter.
Yeah.
Do you know
Or
what I
didn't
mean?
think you did.
I didn't think so.
Yeah.
But in 2020 and now, it's like,
Yeah.
no,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
on.
Yeah. Well, the reason I brought that and asked that question is because the Overton window thing, see, I'm probably more inclined to say I don't know that I'd be in the abolitionist position there that you're articulating because I don't think it's going to work. And I don't know that, I think the questions are too gray. So this gets back to a little bit of our discussion of nationalism, Christian nationalism versus a theistic foundation or a moral theism, right? That I've been advocating for. I think that there are good-natured, relatively speaking good-natured, fallen individuals that are in this country who can be appealed to based on a moral theism.
Yeah.
And I think that they are realistic. I think they would be fine with an abortion policy that is before there's formation of the child. You can't see fingers, toes. Before there's pain that's been able to be recorded now.
Yeah.
Before all the signs, it's like, this is a baby. Don't kill this thing.
Right.
But there is a stage when that's not clear. And
Yeah.
here's my position as a Christian, even though I'll get people that'll get mad at me for this. Hopefully only with 100 people listen to us, there won't be anybody that I know.
Well, now you said as a Christian.
Yes.
It's pretty much Christian nationalism, but go ahead.
No. See, okay, well, maybe, but I'm separating what I think is a policy that should be for the nation as
Okay.
to my own private view as a Christian.
Okay.
My own private view as a Christian is that the Bible, it's best to go with the idea that life starts at conception, but the Bible actually doesn't say that, in my opinion.
No, science does.
I don't think science says it either, at conception.
No, yeah, it definitely does.
Okay, well, let me back up with the word life then. The soul.
Okay.
When does a soul from God get attached to an infant?
Okay.
The Christian common position has been at conception.
Right. When
And
else
I'm okay
could you put
with
it?
that. I don't know.
Okay.
But that's my point. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. We just don't know. We don't actually know. Here's what we also don't know. Where does this soul come from?
But aren't you reversing the burden of proof?
No.
You're saying I don't know when the soul begins.
Yes.
And therefore I don't need to
No.
take the safe
If
route.
it was up to me, I would take the safe route.
Okay.
It's only common sense. But if I'm a room with 100 people or 350 million,
Yeah.
and I have to persuade for a majority to make laws that we live by,
Yeah.
if a bunch of them saying, there'd be a bunch of them that would say, I'm not necessarily sure it's that then, but if I see fingers and toes and the baby flinches with ouch, well, obviously it's there now.
Yeah.
So if they were willing to have a position in between there, I wouldn't argue a lot with them. Even though if it was up to me, it was much safer to go with consensus.
So here's how I would do it, right? Is
That's that over to the window. I'm going to an edge,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
right? I don't
So
think.
what I would want is someone like Trump. He's not a Christian.
Yeah.
You know, he might pretend to. Everybody
yeah,
knows.
Yeah.
What I would want is that the Christians are holding a hard line, saying no. There's no
Yeah.
wiggle room.
You're treating it like
Then
the
someone
primary.
like Trump can say, you know what? Let's make a compromise, and now we save, millions
This
of
is
babies
the force
from
of the
death.
primaries. You vote for the person you like to make an impact because
Okay.
you know you won't win.
Okay.
So you stand up for the guy who is doing all the things you think in hopes of affecting the overall.
Well, but this is
result,
is
right?
why we're a republic. Okay? So if we have every deep red Christian district in the US elects someone to Congress who's going to fight that from the abolitionist side, what you're always going to have also is that one guy from Ohio, right? Who's like pseudo-conservative and doesn't like the Christians, but he's voting along with it. He's Jewish. He wants some
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
That's the guy who's going to propose what you're saying. Who's going to propose the
know.
8-week ban or whatever.
I know.
Yeah, but the Christians are holding the line.
Okay, so in a sense, you're saying it's
Because
like poker.
I don't want to start with compromise.
You're playing poker. Start high so you get to the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well-
and I'm probably not thinking of it like that.
Start high, realizing that even if we got to the middle,
Yeah.
it's better than where we're at now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we can agree on this. The abolitionist thing you talked about here, maybe it's fine for a strategy, but I don't think it's ever going to end up there. So my articulation is more along the lines of that's not going to happen.
Well, that's what Antifa says, but they still do it.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. They're willing to push, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in that analogy, isn't Antifa more the abolitionists are like the Antifa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them
Yeah.
are openly calling for violence. And I'm not going to that.
Oh, the abolitionists are?
Yeah.
Oh.
Against abortion practitioners
Well,
and all
you know
that
what?
stuff.
This has historically been a difficult topic.
Well,
If there's murder,
yeah.
can you not take life to prevent? It happens all the time. Somebody
prevent
breaks
murder.
in and they're threatening with a gun and someone else shoots them.
Right.
You
And
take
so-
that logic to abortion, it is not easy to refute.
Well, so we've talked about this before in our podcast, right? That as long as there's a nonviolent option that's realistic, that's real, that would mitigate or deal with the issue, you pursue the nonviolent option until there are no more options.
Yeah.
But that's where like we've talked about before. If elections don't matter,
I know. This
if
gets to this
representation,
topic.
if people who speak,
Yep.
if Trump's personally getting prosecuted, same thing, right? For saying, I don't think the election was fair, basically, right?
Yeah,
Some of the
yeah.
charges are like,
And do legally what he can.
yeah. So that's political speech.
I know it is.
So if that's where we're at,
Yeah.
it's hard to debate anymore. And that's
Yeah.
a scary place to be.
It is. I completely agree because what it does is it loosens the bounds of restraint.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've noticed several times in the last few days, maybe 2 or 3 times, I should say, People that were arrested because they were threatening to kill somebody. Somebody threatened to kill.
Well, and then killed in the process. Another
Yeah.
guy got killed by the
it was a person
FBI
on the
during
right,
arrest.
Yeah, threatening to kill a person on the left. One was a judge. I don't remember what.
One of them was Biden.
Huh? Oh, one of them was Biden.
So there was a
That's
guy
right.
last week in
That's
Utah,
right.
and he was like 75 and
Yes,
300
yes, yes.
pounds.
He spoke.
And they
Yes,
shot
that's
him in
right.
his house, right? Well,
Yeah.
that happened again. It happened again 2 days ago.
Yeah. So my point is, I've seen these stories. What's happening is our nation is getting pushed more and more to this stressed out, vibratory, and somebody's going to snap.
Yeah.
And the difficulty with it, in my opinion, is that I'm going to feel somewhat sympathetic to the snap.
Yeah, I don't worry that someone will snap because someone always snaps. I worry when everybody snaps.
Well, that's what I mean too.
I mean, how many?
Not
It was
everybody. Let's
3%,
take between
right?
someone and everybody. A large group.
3% of Americans actually fought in the Revolutionary War.
Oh, I've never.
And one of the groups that's been prosecuted around the January 6th riot.
the Proud Boys.
No, they call themselves the 3%ers.
Oh, I've not heard that group.
And they wear an insignia of the Roman numeral 3 with like stars around it. So the idea being, we're willing.
We're in a revolution right now.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, we are. It's just of an invisible.
You don't need
kind.
everybody to snap, is what I'm saying. You need 3 out of 100, and you can get yourself in a pretty terrible war.
Well, in the day of muskets, can you now?
Well, so
Not just weaponry, but surveillance technology.
yes, but the limit to the surveillance
Hong
state,
Kong couldn't.
right? The limit to the surveillance state, as I understand it, and it hasn't been tested, so this is a theory, is they can go after leaders, but they can't stop cells of independent true believers, right? This is the war on terror that we're talking. This is the same
It is,
strategies.
yeah.
So, like your local sheriff, your local PD in a small town or even a larger city here in Oregon is not going to have access to the intelligence apparatus that's reading every email and seeing every, So if you're on a level where you're a pundit speaking with a big voice, well, yeah, they're going to look at everything. They're going to listen to everything you say and everywhere you go.
Yeah.
So, but the 3%ers are going to be, people like from our town.
Did you ever watch the Unabomber thing? I told you about that.
No,
You gotta go watch.
I did
that.
go start reading
The
his
Netflix-
manifesto though.
Manifesto.
Yeah, I mean, I watched something on the Unabomber, but I think
a
it was a
Netflix
reenactment.
series.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
it was a documentary though. What I watched.
Well, it was a documentary style, but it was a reenactment.
Okay, then I think I
It's
did see that.
outstanding.
Yeah.
But what struck me there in that was he felt justified. He felt that it was a war,
Yeah.
and it was a combatant, and he only dealt with combatants. He made buildings are empty. He was not after civilian casualties.
Right.
But he was okay with some in the war casualties as he determined it.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting about that is that's really the place that our forefathers were in. There was just a lot more of them. They're on the shores of a distant land, and they're all like Ted Kaczynski, and they agreed. Not Ted Kaczynski, Kaczynski.
Oh yeah.
And they all agree together to do it.
Well, and it's sort of the John Brown thing too.
Yeah, like John Brown.
You
That's
think you can
exactly
start
right.
something, but
Yeah.
then nobody rallies to your cause, and now you're.
You're hung.
Well, and that was the phrase in the Revolutionary War is we can hang together or we can hang separately.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, that was the logic that they're forced to, right? The oppression from good old King George was so significant, they lost all incentive to try to work through it. Well, that was your comment earlier. All peaceful means.
But the other side of it is the way they won that war was endurance. It's not that they defeated the great British army.
They leveraged the
It's
French.
they got the British army to give up because they just wouldn't quit because they were losing every battle.
Yeah.
Retreat after retreat after retreat.
Guerrilla warfare is hard to. I mean, it wasn't technically, but
they beat the British, like the Taliban beat the U.S.
Yeah.
Which is we're not going anywhere. So keep on coming.
Okay, we got to be close to time.
Oh, we are. Okay, so what we didn't cover, there's a couple things I want to talk about next time. A friend of mine sent me a sermon, and I'm going to send it to you, by J.C. Ryle, talking just about God is love. And it really stirred me to think about how I feel like or in my sermons that I'm exposed to or listen to or preach, we don't emphasize perhaps enough the just raw attributes of God, right? Like, okay, God is love. holy, 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 right? I saw this great R.C. Sproul clip going on about there's no other adjective of God, even love, that is repeated 3 times like this with fervency and never ending.
Yeah.
Holy, holy, holy is the Lord.
Yeah.
So because we don't give that thought, these words to describe God are so abstract. And so they just don't sink in.
Yeah.
And it was neat, that sermon, because he really was, the whole purpose of the sermon was not to look at the meanings of the Bible, to take a scripture and really read into it. It was rather to worship God in his love. And I thought, man, I feel like I want more of that in my life. So it'll be cool to talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. If you're still with us, I want to say thanks. If anything we've said has helped.
What show are we?
We are, do you want me to read the outro?
No, you don't have to read it. But we should say the name.
We're
I'm
on
Mike.
second thought.
You're Luke.
That is one thing I thought of.
I know.
We never actually tell them which is which.
I was listening to the podcast recently, and there's about 6 guys who do this, and there's one main guy, and his wife was out as a baby, so he's off, and so some of the other guys, and so there'd be 2 of them, 3 of them.
Yeah.
And I've noticed they'd say something, and they'd say, so J.C. Ryle, that'd be a good idea. So that'd be a good idea, Luke.
Just a purpose to use names.
And then to use names, and that's also the segue that says, I said my thing, now,
Well, and how to, we can't become well known if they don't actually know who we are.
So we're on second
Maybe
thought
that
with
would
Mike
be
and
better,
Luke.
though. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to try this outro that you wrote.
Oh, you don't have to read it.
Okay, well.
Just give our name.
Yeah. Oh. I appreciate those of you who listen, those of you who stick around, even especially if you're not related to us, even though those relatives who do, we like you too. And share this out, subscribe and all that too, but we want to help more people. So we want to help you think a second time, maybe even a third time, figuring out the connections and root causes, because the truth sets you free, even if it's a process, even if it's a painful process.
That's right. And
Until
it can
next
take
time.
a while to get there.
That's right.
Okay.